Go swim with the sharks, you nasty old woman. My daughter-in-law laughed as she pushed me off the yacht. My son just watched, satisfied, certain that he would inherit my 3 billion pesos. But that same night, when they returned home, they found me alive, and with a very special gift in their hands that would end up destroying them forever. But before continuing, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and share your experience in the comments. We love to hear how far our stories go. Life has a funny way of surprising us when we least expect it. In my case, the surprise came in the form of cold water from the Gulf of Mexico, engulfing my body, as I watched in shock my son's yacht speed away. At 70 years old, I never imagined my own flesh and blood would try to eliminate me for money. It all started on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday. I was recovering from a 6-week hip replacement when Daniel called me personally, not through his assistant, which should have been my first red flag. His voice sounded warm, filled with what I naively mistook for genuine affection. "Mom, we want to celebrate your recovery from surgery," he said. Just the three of us, like a real family. Those words found the empty space that had existed in my heart since Ricardo, my husband, had passed away 2 years ago. I felt so alone, so desperate for any sign that my son and his wife Valentina still wanted me in their lives. Things had felt different between us since Ricardo's death, colder, more distant. I had given them the house where we raised Daniel, preferring to move to a simpler condo, believing that would help them restart their family life. That morning, I dressed carefully. I chose my navy blue dress, the one Ricardo always said made my eyes pop. I put on a little makeup and the pearl earrings my late husband gave me for our 30th wedding anniversary. I wanted to look my best for this special moment with my son. The yacht was stunning, a gleaming white vessel that probably cost more than most houses. Daniel greeted me at the dock with a hug that in retrospect felt mechanical and rehearsed. Valentina watched from the deck, her smile as sharp as broken glass. "Isn't it beautiful?" Daniel asked, gesturing toward the boat. 13 meters of pure luxury. We're thinking of taking her to Cancun next month. What she didn't mention was that they had bought the yacht with the money I gave them the year before to invest in Daniel's consulting company. 3 million pesos, which I was beginning to suspect, had never even seen the inside of any business accounts. The first hour at sea was pleasant. We sailed into calm waters with the Veracruz coast receding behind us. Valentina served mimosas and talked about plans to remodel the house, my old home, but then Daniel started asking questions, casual at first, about my will, about trust arrangements, about whether I'd considered making changes to simplify things for them. "It's just that inheritance paperwork can be so complicated, Mom," he said, refilling my champagne glass with a little too much enthusiasm. "We want to make sure everything's sorted." It was then that I noticed Valentina filming me with her cell phone. Not openly, but holding it at an angle while pretending to take selfies, capturing me on camera while drinking, while talking about financial matters. The pieces began to fall into place with horrifying clarity. The surgery I had. They insisted on handling all my paperwork afterward. The power of attorney documents they brought to the hospital, claiming they were only temporary, just to help with the bills while I recovered. The way my financial advisor had stopped returning my calls. "Daniel," I said carefully, putting down my drink. "I'd like to go back to the coast now." That's when his mask slipped completely. "I'm afraid that's not going to happen, Mom." His voice was different now. Harsher, devoid of any warmth. "Look, we need to have a conversation about your health, about your memory problems." Memory problems. I was smarter than both of them combined and knew perfectly well that I didn't suffer from any cognitive problems. "You've shown signs of dementia," Valentina added, approaching like a predator. "We have that documented. The doctors agree that you're no longer capable of managing your financial affairs." That's absurd. But even as I protested, I realized how carefully they'd orchestrated everything. The boat was miles from shore. No other boat in sight. Just the three of us, the ocean, and their plan to convince me to sign everything away or— "Mom, we're trying to help you," Daniel said, but his eyes were cold as winter. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." I stood up slowly. My hips still hurt, but my mind was clear. "What if I refuse?" That's when Valentina smiled. She actually smiled, for the first time all day. "Well, an old woman. Recent surgery. Probably took too many painkillers. Got disoriented on the boat." He shrugged. "Tragic accidents happen all the time. I had raised this man since he was a baby. I taught him how to ride a bike. I paid for his college, his wedding, his house. And now he was here nodding his head while his wife threatened my life. They're crazy and think they'll get away with it. Actually, Mom, we've thought this through quite carefully." Daniel pulled out a folder of papers. "Your signature here transferring all assets to us immediately for your own protection, and we all returned home happy." I looked at the documents, at my son's expectant face, at Valentina's cell phone still recording. Then I looked at the ocean, vast and dangerous and somehow less terrifying than the two people who were supposed to love me. "Go to hell," I said. That's when Valentina moved behind me and whispered those words about sharks. The push wasn't violent. They were too smart for that. Just a sudden push when I was off balance, facing down into the water. As I hit the cold water of the Gulf of Mexico, I heard Daniel cry out in mock concern, "Mom! Oh my God! Mom!" But I also heard Valentina's quieter voice speaking to someone on the phone. "Yes, we'll need you to submit the emergency request first thing Monday morning. She's clearly not competent." The water closed over my head, and I had more immediate problems than his betrayal. I was always a strong swimmer. Ricardo and I used to swim together every morning, but the cold shocked my system and my clothes dragged me down. I kicked off my shoes and surfaced gasping just in time to see the yacht speeding away. They really were leaving me there to die. That's when I saw the fishing boat. Captain Mateo Valdez was exactly the kind of man who would jump into shark-infested waters to save a drowning grandmother. He was in his 60s, his face weathered by decades in the ocean, and possessed of a moral compass that seemed to be missing from my own family tree. He and his teenage grandson, Alejandro, hoisted me aboard their small boat as I shivered uncontrollably. "Holy hell, ma'am, what happened to you?" he asked, wrapping me in a blanket that smelled of salt and motor oil. I tried to explain through chattering teeth, but the words came out slurred. "My family, them the yacht. We saw them speed off," Mateo said sadly. "They didn't even look back. What kind of people leave someone floating in the middle of the ocean? The kind who inherits 3 billion pesos if I'm not around to stop them," I thought. But out loud, I just said, "The guy who isn't really family." Mateo radioed the Coast Guard while Alejandro covered me with another blanket. "This is the Santa Maria. We have a woman we pulled from the water about 12 miles southeast of Puerto Progreso. She's conscious," he replied, "but she needs medical attention." "Wait," I said, grabbing Mateo's arm. "Please, no, don't let them know you found me. Not yet." Mateo studied my face with the sharp eyes of someone who's seen enough of life to recognize when someone is running from something more than just cold water. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" "Yes, but not the kind you're thinking." I took a deep breath. "I need to get to shore without anyone knowing I survived." "Can you help me?" Alejandro looked at his grandfather, uncertain. "Grandpa, we shouldn't—" "Shoulds and shouldn'ts, they're funny things," Mateo said slowly. "Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel like following the rules." He pressed the radio button again. "Coast Guard, this is the Santa Maria. False alarm during that rescue. It turned out to be debris in the water, all clean." As we headed to a small private dock, I told them all about Daniel and Valentina, about the money, about the documents they wanted me to sign. Mateo listened without interruption. His expression darkened with each detail. "So you thought you'd rather be rich orphans than bankrupt children with a living mother?" Mateo said when I finished. "Apparently." "So what are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What was she going to do? She was officially dead as far as Daniel and Valentina knew. They'd return to shore, call the authorities, report me missing, and play the grieving family role while executing the legal documents they'd prepared. But here's the thing about being supposedly dead. It gives you options you never had while you were alive. "I'm going to let them think they've won," I said, surprised at how calm my voice sounded. "And then I'm going to destroy them." Mateo smiled for the first time since he pulled me out of the water. Now that sounds like a plan worth helping out with. Alejandro dropped us off at a small dock in a cove I'd never seen before. Mateo knew a woman there who ran a small inn. No questions, just money. Senora Juana, a tough-looking woman in her 70s, took one look at my ragged state and immediately began heating up soup. She didn't even blink when Mateo explained that I needed a place to stay, off the books, for a while. "Honey, I've run this place for 30 years, he said, placing a bowl of chicken broth in front of me. "I've seen people running from all kinds of things. As long as you don't bring violence to my door, you're welcome." That night, while Daniel and Valentina were presumably filing complaints about their tragically missing mother, I was sitting in Senora Juana's kitchen, wearing borrowed clothes and plotting her downfall. Mateo agreed to be my eyes and ears. His boat was legitimately used for fishing trips, which meant I was often near the marina where Daniel kept the yacht. He could monitor their movements, listen to their conversations, maybe even do some research of his own. "Here's what I don't understand," I said, drinking my third cup of coffee. "How did they plan to make this legal? Even if I were to die accidentally, there are procedures, investigations." "That's been bothering me too," Mateo agreed. "They had to have something more than just fakes. Someone inside." That night, I made a list of everyone who had access to my financial information since Ricardo died. My lawyer, my accountant, my financial advisor, the bank managers, the trust officers. Someone was feeding Daniel and Valentina information helping them plan this, and I was going to find out who. But first, I needed to know exactly what story they were telling about my disappearance. The lady, Juana, had an old computer with internet access, and I spent hours reading news reports about the tragic boat accident that claimed the life of the widow of prominent businessman Ricardo Ramirez. The articles painted a picture of a grieving family dealing with the mental decline of an elderly woman. Daniel was quoted extensively speaking of my confusion and memory problems in recent months. Valentina apparently sobbed to reporters about how worried they were about my safety. They even included a photo of me at Daniel's birthday party last year, looking a little dazed while holding a drink. I remembered that moment. I'd been confused because no one told me it was a surprise party, and I'd arrived at what I thought was a quiet family dinner to find 20 strangers in my old house. But in the photo, I just looked lost and old, exactly the image they wanted to project. The obituary was already online. Doña Teresa Ramirez's beloved mother and grandmother passed away in a tragic boating accident while enjoying a walk with her devoted family. In lieu of flowers, the family requests donations to the Mexican Alzheimer's Association. Even in death, they were creating the narrative of my supposed mental decline. "Scoundrels," I muttered, closing the laptop. Mrs. Juana looked up from her knitting. "Planning something special for them?" "Oh yes," I said. "Something very special." The funeral was surprisingly well attended for someone who was supposedly dying of dementia. I watched from across the cemetery through binoculars Mateo had borrowed from his fishing gear hidden behind a maintenance shed that gave me a perfect view of the proceedings. Daniel spared no expense. A top-of-the-line casket, empty of course, elaborate floral arrangements, and a professional program with my photo on the front. He and Valentina stood at the graveside in perfectly coordinated black, accepting condolences from friends, business associates, and people I barely recognized. What struck me most was how genuinely sad some of the mourners seemed. My neighbor Dolores was weeping openly. My friends from the book club came, even the doctor. Ruiz, who handled my hip surgery, was there looking somber. These people genuinely cared about me, and Daniel and Valentina were accepting their sympathy, knowing full well I was alive. "Seeing anything interesting?" Mateo whispered, crouching down next to me. Besides my son giving an Oscar-worthy performance look who's not there. Mateo adjusted his own binoculars. "Like who?" "My financial advisor Ricardo Benavides, my lawyer Patricia Castro, my accountant Miguel Torres." I lowered my binoculars, the pieces falling into place. The people who would normally be at the funeral of a client worth 3 billion pesos were nowhere to be seen. Maybe they're busy with inheritance matters? Perhaps. Or maybe they can't look people in the eye while being part of this plan. After the service, I watched Daniel and Valentina interact with the crowd, like politicians shaking hands, accepting hugs, playing their roles perfectly. But I also noticed how quickly they turned people away when someone started asking detailed questions about my final days. "I need to get into my old house," I told Mateo as we walked back to Senora Juana's inn. "That sounds dangerous. They're probably staying there now, right?" "Not according to the property records I checked this morning. They kept their own place. My house has been empty since I moved into the condo last year." I pulled out a piece of paper where I'd been taking notes. "But here's the interesting part. Someone has been paying the bills, the electricity, the water, the heat. Someone is keeping her going. Why would they do that if no one lives there?" Good question. I think it's time we found out. That night, Mateo dropped me off 3 blocks from my old house in the Polanco neighborhood of Mexico City. The house where I lived with Ricardo for 35 years, raised Daniel, and hosted countless dinners and festive celebrations. The house I gave to my son because I thought family meant something. It was after midnight and the street was silent, except for the occasional car passing by. I still had my key. Daniel never thought to ask for it back, and I slipped out the back door like a criminal breaking into my own old house. The house felt different. Not exactly empty, but somehow off. I moved through the familiar rooms using the flashlight Mateo had given me, being careful to avoid the windows facing the street. The living room furniture was covered with sheets, but I could see that new pieces had been added. Expensive pieces. A leather sofa that cost more than most people's cars. An entertainment center that definitely wasn't there when I lived here. In the kitchen, the refrigerator was stocked not with the basics you'd keep in a house you visited occasionally, but with fresh food, expensive food, imported cheese, organic vegetables, the kind of top-quality items that suggested regular occupation. But it was in the home office, Ricardo's old office, that I found what I was really looking for. The desk was covered with documents, legal papers, financial statements, and most damning of all, a detailed timeline of what they called Project Teresa. My own name becoming a code word for my elimination. I took photos of everything with the disposable camera Mateo had given me, my hands shaking with rage as I read their plans. They'd been working on this for over a year, carefully documenting what they claimed were signs of my mental deterioration. Doctor visits where they instructed me to look confused, social situations where they groomed me to appear disoriented. The birthday party photo in the newspaper. They deliberately didn't tell me it was a surprise party and then captured my confused reaction. The medication mix-up I had 3 months ago that landed me in the ER had my pill bottles switched. Every moment of confusion, every instance where I felt off balance or forgetful, had been carefully orchestrated and documented, as evidence of dementia. But the most terrifying document was a letter from someone signed only as MT, apparently one of her co-conspirators. The timeline needs to be accelerated. Teresa has been asking too many questions about the power of attorney documents. If she gets suspicious and seeks out a lawyer independently, everything will fall apart. I recommend moving to Phase 3 in the next 2 weeks. Phase 3, according to the timeline, was my death. I was photographing the last document when I heard a car door close outside. Headlights swept across the front windows, and I heard voices approaching the front door. Daniel and Valentina were returning home from their morning performance. I quickly gathered my things and headed for the back door, but I could hear their conversation as they walked in. Do you think Mrs. Perez believed it? She was too busy crying to think straight. Besides, what's he going to investigate? Mom fell off a boat. It happens. And the will, how long until we can? The estate opens on Monday. MT says we'll have full access to the accounts in 6 weeks. I walked out the back door and into the garden, my heart pounding. But as I slipped around the side of the house toward the street, I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. A baby's cry. There was a baby in my old house. Daniel and Valentina never mentioned having a child, which meant there was more to this story than I realized. The baby changed everything. As I crouched behind the rose bushes I'd planted 20 years ago, listening to the sound of a baby crying in my old house, I realized this wasn't just about my money. This was about something much bigger. Mateo picked me up at the corner 15 minutes later and was still shaking when I got into his truck. You look like you saw a ghost, he said. Worse. I saw my replacement. I told him about the baby, about the documents, about the mysterious MT who seemed to be orchestrating everything. A baby, Mateo repeated slowly. They never mentioned having a child. Never. And Daniel always said he and Valentina weren't ready to have children. He said they were too focused on their careers. I took out my disposable camera. I need to develop these photos, but not anywhere they might have connections. Mateo knew a guy in Puerto Progreso who ran a 1-hour photo development shop and didn't ask any questions. While we waited for the photos, we sat in Mateo's truck drinking gas station coffee and trying to put the puzzle together. So, you've been planning this for over a year, Mateo said, studying my notes. Systematically making you look incompetent, documenting everything, getting someone within your financial team to help them. And now there's a baby involved, which means either they've been lying about having children, or... I stopped. Another possibility occurred to me. Or the baby isn't theirs. What do you mean? Think about it. If they're planning to steal my fortune, they'd want to make sure they have a legitimate heir, someone to inherit everything if something happened to them. But they would need a child with the correct lineage, the legal right. Mateo looked at me with concern. Do you think they stole a baby? I think they did something, and I think MT, whoever he is the key to understanding what. The photos were devastating when they were revealed. Clear evidence of their year-long conspiracy, complete with timelines, fake medical reports, and financial projections showing how they planned to spend my money. But the most disturbing photo was the last one. A birth certificate I almost missed hidden beneath other papers. Baby Ramirez, born 3 weeks ago. Mother Valentina Ramirez. Father Daniel Ramirez. This birth certificate is fake, I told Mateo. Completely fabricated. I was near Valentina just 4 days ago on that yacht. She definitely wasn't recovering from childbirth. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in Senora Juana's guest room staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything I had learned. My son and daughter-in-law had spent over a year systematically destroying my reputation, plotting my murder, and falsifying documents to steal my fortune. And now they had a baby whose existence they were hiding from the world. The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I'm going back, I told Mateo over breakfast. But not to the house. I'm going to follow them. That's too dangerous, Teresa. If they see you, they won't, because as far as they know, I'm fish food. I spread a local map on Senora Juana's kitchen table. Look, they have to take the baby somewhere during the day. Daycare, a nanny, something. Babies don't disappear for 8 hours while the parents play the grieving family. Mateo studied the map doubtfully. What do you hope to find? The truth about this baby, and hopefully the identity of MT. The lady. Juana, who had been listening silently while washing the dishes, finally spoke. There's a private detective in town who owes me a favor. Professional, discreet, and very good at following people without being seen. I can't involve anyone else in this, I protested. My dear, said Mrs. Juana, drying her hands on a dish towel. You're past the point of being able to handle this alone. These people tried to kill you. They won't hesitate to try again if they find out you're alive. He was right, of course. But hiring a private detective would require admitting to more people that I wasn't really dead. That would mean expanding the circle of people who knew my secret. What kind of favor does this investigator owe you? Mrs. Juana smiled mysteriously. The kind where my grandson didn't go to jail for something stupid he did when he was 22. The detective's name is Daniel Olvera, a very reliable ex-cop who's excellent at making problems go away. At noon, I was sitting in Daniel Olvera's small office above a restaurant in downtown Puerto Progreso, telling my story for the 3rd time in a week. Daniel was about 50 years old with prematurely gray hair and the kind of alert eyes that didn't miss a thing. So you want me to follow your son and daughter-in-law to find out about this mysterious baby and identify their co-conspirator? He summarized after I finished. That's correct. And what are you going to pay me with, because according to the newspapers, all your assets are frozen pending inheritance? I took out an envelope I'd prepared earlier. Cash. I had some emergency money hidden in a safe deposit box Daniel didn't know about. Ricardo always insisted we keep liquid funds available for emergencies. Daniel flipped through the bills enough to cover 2 weeks of surveillance and nodded. I'll need photos of the targets and any addresses where they might be staying. I gave him everything I had, including the photos of my break-in at the house. Daniel studied them carefully, paying special attention to the documents with MT's mysterious signature. This handwriting looks familiar, he said, taking out a magnifying glass. Professional, but with some distinctive features. Do you mind if I run it through some databases? Do what you have to do. One more thing, Daniel said as I prepared to leave. If these people are as dangerous as you say, we need a security protocol. You contact me every 12 hours. If I don't hear from you, I'll take everything to the police. I agreed, although I hoped it wouldn't come to that. The less official involvement, the better. At least until I understood exactly what Daniel and Valentina had done. That afternoon, I returned to Senora Juana's and waited because now I had help. Real help. Professional help. And in less than 24 hours, I'd know exactly who tried to kill me and why. Daniel Olvera was worth every penny I paid him. By the end of the 2nd day, I had more information about Daniel and Valentina's activities than I had learned in months of living with them. Your son has been very busy since you supposedly died, Daniel said, spreading photographs on Mrs. Juana's kitchen table. Multiple meetings with lawyers, 2 visits to the bank, and 3 separate trips to a private medical facility on the outskirts of Mexico City. The medical facility, La Esperanza Reproductive Services, is very exclusive, very expensive, and very discreet. Daniel pointed to a photo of Daniel and Valentina entering a modern glass building. They specialize in surrogacy arrangements for wealthy clients who want privacy. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed made my stomach turn. They bought a baby, apparently, and not just any baby. They specifically requested a newborn who could be passed off as their biological son. According to my contact in La Esperanza, the arrangements were made 8 months ago, paid in cash, with instructions to have the birth certificate pre-prepared. Mrs. Juana sat down with 3 cups of coffee and joined us at the table. So they planned your death. They bought a baby to inherit your fortune, and they had someone on your financial team help them. About that, Daniel said, pulling out another photo. I think I found MT. The photo showed a woman in her 40s with short red hair and an expensive briefcase shaking Daniel's hand outside a downtown law firm. She looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't remember where from. Miranda Torres, continued Daniel, a partner at Morrison Torres & Associates. They handle estate planning for several prominent families in Mexico City. Torres, I repeated. Wait, Miguel Torres is my accountant. Are they related, married? And this is where it gets interesting. Miranda Torres has been quietly building a client base of wealthy seniors with strained family relationships. She specializes in what she calls family transition planning. You mean murder? Mrs. Juana said bluntly. I mean, he creates legal structures that allow families to take control of assets, while the elderly person is still alive using claims of incompetence, dementia, or diminished capacity. He's done this at least 6 times in the past 3 years. Daniel spread more photos, surveillance photos of Miranda Torres, meeting with different families, entering various law firms, visiting what appeared to be private medical facilities. She's running an entire operation. She finds wealthy, elderly people with greedy relatives, helps orchestrate evidence of mental decline, provides legal cover for asset transfers, and takes a substantial portion of the inheritance. And if the elderly person refuses to cooperate or becomes suspicious, they have accidents, boat accidents, falls down stairs, and drug overdoses. Always tragic, always plausibly accidental, and always financially convenient for the surviving family. I felt sick. This wasn't just about my money. It was about a systematic operation targeting vulnerable older people. How many people has she killed that she can prove none? I suspect at least 12 in the last 5 years. She's very good at covering her tracks, and only works with families who can provide plausible alternative explanations for their relatives' deaths. We have to stop her. We will. But first, we need to understand exactly what your son and daughter-in-law have already set in motion, because according to my sources, they filed preliminary inheritance documents yesterday. Daniel pulled out a legal folder. They're claiming that you died without a valid will, which would make them your sole heirs. They're also claiming that any existing estate planning documents are invalid because they were signed while you were mentally incompetent. But I have a will, a very specific and detailed will that was updated just 2 years ago. I know I found it. Daniel opened the folder and took out a family document. My will with what looked like my signature at the bottom, but the text was completely different from what I remembered signing. They replaced it, I whispered, scanning the forged document. This leaves Daniel with provisions for any future children he may have, including the baby they just acquired through La Esperanza Reproductive Services. I stood up and walked to Señora Juana's window, looking out at the ocean. A week ago, I'd been a grieving widow, trying to maintain a relationship with my only family. Now, I was a murder victim who survived my own death, discovering my son was part of a larger criminal enterprise that targeted the elderly. There's something else, Daniel said softly, about the baby. I turned to look at him. The biological mother was a 17-year-old girl named Sarah Aguilar, a runaway from a city in northern Mexico with no family, no support system. Miranda Torres found her in a shelter in Mexico City and offered her 100,000 pesos to carry a baby for a loving couple who couldn't have children. Where is she now? Daniel's expression was grim. According to medical records, she died of complications during childbirth, but I spoke with a nurse at La Esperanza who remembers Sarah, a healthy girl, no risk factors, normal pregnancy until the day she gave birth. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Did they kill her? I said. I think so, but I can't prove it yet. Daniel collected her photos. What I can prove is that your son and daughter-in-law are part of a criminal organization that has been systematically murdering elderly people for their money. And tomorrow morning, they'll meet with Miranda Torres to finalize the legal transfer of your assets. I sat back down, my mind racing. Where Torres's office downtown at 10 a.m. I looked at Mrs. Juana, then at Daniel, then at the photos scattered on the table showing my son shaking the hand of a professional assassin. So I think it's time for Teresa Ramirez to rise from the dead. The hardest part of planning your return from the dead is deciding which audience gets the shock first. I could confront Daniel and Valentina privately, giving them a chance to explain themselves, but that would mean they deserved an explanation. Or I could make my resurrection public, letting them discover I was alive the same way the rest of the world would. I chose option 3, strategic stalking. You want what? Daniel Olvera asked when I explained my plan. I want them to know I'm alive, but not how much I know about their operation. I want them to be scared, unbalanced, making mistakes. Mrs. Juana nodded approvingly. Psychological warfare. I like it. The plan was simple, but effective. While Daniel, Valentina, and Miranda Torres were at their meeting downtown, dividing my assets, I would be making my presence known in more subtle ways. Daniel had discovered that they were keeping the baby at Daniel's house during the day with a private nurse who had been hired through one of Miranda Torres's front companies. The nurse, a woman named Cecilia Perez, had no idea she was caring for a baby who had essentially been bought through the death of his teenage mother. Cecilia is a good person, Daniel assured me after running a background check. Single mother, nursing degree, clean record. He probably thinks he's helping a legitimate family care for their child. Then he deserves to know the truth. That morning, while Daniel and Valentina were downtown, legally erasing me from existence, I was standing on the front porch of my old house. I rang the doorbell. Cecilia Perez was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with tired eyes and a genuine warmth. She opened the door holding a baby bottle and wearing a uniform covered with cartoon animals. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Hi, Cecilia. My name is Teresa Ramirez. I think you're babysitting my grandson." The blood drained from her face. She knew that name. It had been all over the news last week. The wealthy widow who died in a boating accident. "You dead?" "Yes, I've been reading about it. A fascinating story, though not entirely accurate." I smiled pleasantly. "May I come in? I think we need to talk." Cecilia stepped back, still staring at me as if I really were a ghost. I followed her into the living room where a baby was in a rocking chair, babbling contentedly. "Oh," I sighed, seeing the baby for the first time. "Oh, what a beautiful thing." The baby was perfect, maybe 3 weeks old, with dark hair and serious brown eyes. He was wearing an expensive suit, and the room around him was filled with high-end baby gear that must have cost thousands of pesos. "What's his name?" I asked, sitting down in a chair next to the rocking chair. "Baby Ramirez," Cecilia said automatically, then corrected herself. "I mean, they said his name would be Ricardo Jr. after his grandfather, but they're not sure yet." "They're not sure because they don't know him well enough to name him," I said softly. "Because he's not really their baby, is he?" Cecilia sat down heavily on the couch. "I don't understand what's going on. You're supposed to be dead. And Daniel and Valentina, they're supposed to be grieving parents who needed help with their newborn while dealing with family matters." "Cecilia, I need you to listen very carefully. This baby is not Daniel and Valentina's biological child. They purchased him through an illegal surrogacy arrangement that resulted in the death of his biological mother, and they tried to murder me 6 days ago so they could steal my inheritance and raise this child as their heir." "That's it. That's impossible." I pulled out the photos Daniel had taken, the documents I had copied from Daniel's home office, the evidence of Miranda Torres's criminal operation. I showed Cecilia everything, watching her expression change from disbelief to horror as the magnitude of the conspiracy became clear. The teenager who gave birth to this baby was named Sarah Aguilar, I said softly. She was 17 years old with no family, no support system. She was told she was helping a loving couple who couldn't have children. He died during childbirth under suspicious circumstances. Cecilia was crying now, looking at the baby with a new understanding. He's an orphan. Yes. And if Daniel and Valentina have their way, he'll grow up thinking they're his parents, never knowing that his real mother died to give him life. What do you want me to do? I want you to take pictures. Document everything you can about how he's treated what you were told, who else was involved, and then I want you to help me make sure this baby grows up knowing the truth about where he came from. Cecilia wiped her eyes and nodded. His real name should be Ricardo Sara Ramirez, after his grandfather and biological mother. That's perfect. I spent an hour with Cecilia and baby Ricardo Sara taking photos, documenting the setup at my old house, and explaining what would happen next. Cecilia agreed to continue caring for the baby while I secretly gathered evidence and kept me informed about Daniel and Valentina's activities. They'll be back around noon, he told me as I prepared to leave. They always come home for lunch to see the baby make calls and take care of business. Perfect by then, they'll have received my first message. While I was talking with Cecilia, Daniel Olvera was busy downtown. He had parked in front of Anda Torres's office building with a telephoto lens, taking photos of Daniel and Valentina entering the building meeting with Torres and shaking hands over what they thought was my legal death certificate. But the real gift was what Mateo delivered to his law firm while they were in the meeting. I had written a simple note on elegant stationery. Dear Daniel and Valentina, the reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. We need to talk. With love, Mom P.S. Give my regards to little Ricardo Zara. He's beautiful. The note was delivered by a messenger at exactly 11:47 a.m. While they were still in Torres's office finalizing the inheritance paperwork, according to Daniel Olvera, who watched from across the street, the three ran out of the building minutes after receiving the note, their faces pale with panic. The psychological warfare had begun. And that afternoon, when they returned to my old house, expecting to find their comfortable conspiracy intact, they would discover that their supposed dead victim had been very busy. Because I wasn't just alive, I was angry. I was armed with evidence and ready for war. I was sitting in my favorite chair, the one Ricardo had bought me for our 20th anniversary, when Daniel and Valentina returned home. I positioned myself to be the first thing they saw when they walked through the front door. The expression on their faces was worth 6 days in the Gulf of Mexico. Hello, dear, I said pleasantly without standing up. How was the meeting? I hope you didn't sign anything important while I was gone. What happened next changed not only my life, but the lives of dozens of other potential victims. The investigations led to the conviction of Miranda Torres and her accomplices, including my own son and daughter-in-law. Little Ricardo Zara found a loving home with me, and together we created a new kind of family, one based on truth, justice, and the love we choose to give, not on blood or obligation. Sometimes, when I look at my grandson's sleeping face, I still see traces of Zara Aguilar, the young mother he will never know. I promised myself that he'd grow up knowing where he came from a brave mother who wanted to give him a better life, and from a grandmother who went through hell itself to ensure he had that chance. Now, if you enjoyed this story, click on this next video that appears on the screen because it contains a tale of betrayal and twists like you've never seen before.